Our GDP stands for Real Gross Domestic Product. Our GDP is the total market value of all new final goods and services produced within a nation in 1 year. This measures the overall well-being of a country and the size of its economy. The goal rate for the U.S. GDP is 3% and the current growth rate for 2012 is 3.1%. So based on those numbers, we can conclude that the U.S. RGDP for 2012 was going at a steady rate. If we compare the third quarter growth rate for 2011 and 2012, we can see that for 2011, the RGDP growth rate was at 2%, where now it is around 3%. So by comparing the two, one can notice that the US grew at a steadier rate in 2012 than it did in 2011. Therefore, the country is in a much better state now than it was last year. Being unemployed means that you are not working, but you are actively looking for work. Since the natural rate of unemployment is 5% and we are currently at a rate of 7.8%, one can conclude that the country has high unemployment. The extra 2.8% represents those who are cyclically unemployed, meaning that they lost their job due to a downturn in the economy. Therefore, the country is not in a good condition and is in a recession. There is also structural unemployment when your job becomes obsolete, and frictional unemployment when there's a transition between jobs within the same industry. If we compare the rate of unemployment in January for 2012 and January 2013, it is 8.5% and 7.8% respectively. We can note that the country has improved its condition in the last year, therefore we can conclude that the U.S. is improving its condition yearly. As you can see, over the last 4 years, the U.S. has seen a large decline in our GDP and a slow recovery. The U.S. is currently in a recessionary gap in the expansion of the business cycle. A recessionary gap is when current output is less than potential output. This happens when either aggregate demand or short-run aggregate supply decreases. Things that can decrease aggregate demand are any decrease in consumption due to loss of wealth or an increase in taxes, any decrease in investment, whether it be from businesses or from private families, any decrease in government spending, and any decrease in net exports. On the graph, if we see a decrease in aggregate demand, keeping short-run aggregate supply constant, we are going to see a decrease in price level, a decrease in our GDP, and an increase in unemployment. Things that can decrease short-run aggregate supply include supply shocks, a decrease in worker productivity, and an increase in input costs. Also, in a recessionary gap, there tends to be high unemployment and a low RGDP rate. If we see a decrease in short-run aggregate supply, keeping aggregate demand constant, we see an increase in price level, a decrease in RGDP, and an increase in unemployment. Both of these situations are what causes a recessionary gap, which is what we are in now. In order to correct the recession, AD and SRAS must increase in order to increase our GDP and decrease price level, which is the process that we are trying to achieve. An inflationary gap is when current output is greater than potential output. This happens when aggregate demand increases or short-run aggregate supply increases. In an inflationary gap, there tends to be low unemployment, high RGDP, and high price levels. The inflation rate is 1.76%. Inflation is the general rise in the price of goods and services. When there is inflation, the purchasing power of $1 is less, and it is measured by the Consumer Price Index. Obama has made many efforts to revive the plummeting American economy. Some actions that he made have been helping out the auto businesses. He gave them loans, and the companies were able to revive themselves and create millions of jobs. Also, Obama has increased the U.S. manufacturing and created thousands of jobs and caused the biggest growth seen in a decade. This also increased U.S.-made goods, bringing back the money that had gone overseas. Obama also created Wall Street reform so no big companies would ever have to be bailed out again. Based on this information, we can conclude that Obama increased government spending in certain areas that needed more help, decreased imports, created optimism in Wall Street, and created jobs. This causes an increase in AD and an increase in SRAS, therefore increasing the RGDP and reducing unemployment, which leads to a greater recovery from a big recession. Obama follows the Keynesian economic system, therefore he ensures that there is government intervention to correct the economy. Obama's actions follow exactly what the macroeconomic theory suggests, and it has worked. He also supports progressive taxes, where the additional dollar of income is taxed at a higher percent of income. Boehner has very different policies. His ideas are to reduce government spending. Now, according to the fiscal policy, that is done when the country is in a state of inflation, which it is not. Boehner intends to reduce taxes overall and promote small business competition, which means businesses will have more money to invest in their businesses and create growth. As government spending decreases, aggregate demand decreases, and the price level and our GDP will decrease, which will ultimately increase unemployment. Republicans generally seem to follow the Keynesian economics, but by promoting a decrease in government spending, they also follow the classics economic theory by believing that the government will self-correct in the long run. The budget deficit is when government spending in one year is greater than the tax revenue. A budget surplus is when government spending in one year is less than the tax revenue, and the national debt is the sum of all the deficits minus what has been paid back, which is the overall outstanding debt. Over the last 4 years during Obama's presidency, we can see a rise in the national debt. It has increased $5.3 trillion and has now passed the $16 trillion mark, and it is now $16.4 trillion. And with President Obama's budget proposal, the debt would increase to an estimated $24.5 trillion by 2022. In order to address the fiscal cliff and prevent the country from returning into the trough of the recession, the American Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012 was passed by the United States Congress on January 1, 2013. The act partially resolves the United States fiscal cliff by addressing the expiration of some parts of the Bush tax cuts. As a compromise, the act allows many of the Bush tax cuts while retaining the 39.6% tax rate at upper income levels that became effective on January 1st. The act also establishes a cap on tax deductions and credits for those at upper income levels.